Okay. Yeah, this is Senate Judiciary Committee. It is Tuesday, January 26th, 2021. Um, we're meeting remotely once again, and today's subject is the replacement of Woodside. Since Woodside no longer exists, we probably need to find a new term for this. But I'm hopeful that we'll have a discussion today about juvenile justice and how we're responding to it. And I've become increasingly concerned. I think Commissioner Brown is prepared to talk a little bit about it, but just as we've had problems in the adult system with folks who have significant mental illness or traumatic brain injury or are low functioning or ending up in a correction system, the same groups are ending up in our juvenile justice system and being asked to be dealt with by the Department of Children and Families rather than either mental health or jail. I hope that this is the beginning of a conversation and not the end of that conversation, because as we look at how to respond in talking with people in the field that I used to work in and that Senator Nickey used to work in, increasingly we're seeing numbers of people who are seriously with serious emotional problems being asked to be dealt with in programs that were developed for different categories. There's so anyway, I'll leave it there, and we'll. John Campbell, are you ready to say a few words, or jump ahead if you wouldn't mind?
Sure. It's going to be pretty quick because you guys have heard it all before. First of all, for the record, John Campbell, Executive Director of the State's Attorneys and Sheriffs. Again, as I said, you all have heard this repeatedly since this crisis has started when they closed Woodside. But what I'm seeing now, I've been talking with quite a few of our prosecutors over this past week who've told me about incidents that really scary, where the kids who are, as you just pointed out, either have some emotional mental health issues or cognitively are disabled, and they're being lodged in some police stations, like up in St. Albans. St. Albans has lodged them a couple of times because there's no way to transport down to 204. We've had a couple that have been in hotels, and to me, what you're doing is you're putting a person in a hotel, but you're also putting them with a caseworker, and I don't think that that's the best environment, the best way to do this. And again, part of it is also a transport issue. And I reached out to our sheriffs and asked them, what the problems, why can't they transport? And it seems that a lot of these incidents are happening later at night. And so the part-time, what we call a per diem deputies, those guys, they've already worked some 10 hours a day, and some of them also work part-time so that they've worked, another job, or they have to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. And then the state paid deputies, they are, your straight 8 hours a day, and they can do it if they want, but they also, I guess they're the sheriffs, they're allowed to say no because they've already worked their 8 hours. So you're not getting them transported. I'll be really honest here. What really worries me is that this other location that is being discussed, my understanding is it's probably a year off before they get all the permits and, before they get all the things done. Now, I may be wrong, and of course, the commissioner will know better. But until then, we are playing with fire. There's just no way, from what I have seen happening in just 5 or 6 cases, that to me had potential for really blowing up and to be where people could get hurt. We need to figure something out before then, and we need to find a facility that will be able to house the juveniles that we're discussing, and it's got to be a secure facility, and one of those no reject or eject type facilities. So There's really not much more I can say other than, the warning lights are all there. And, I just don't want to have to come back and then, having questions saying, well, how did this happen when there was a tragedy? Because we're seeing the roadmap now as to how it is happening.
John, do you see an increase in kids being charged who may have assaulted staff members, or either staff members of DCF or staff members of group homes, that sort of thing?
To be honest with you, I don't know that. I will check that out.
Could you poll the state's attorneys in those districts where they have, well, actually, every district has social workers. So, but if you could poll the state's attorneys to see if they're seeing an increase in assaultive behavior. I know that kids used to break furniture all the time when I worked at 204. But, I don't remember many assaults, but I'm hearing more and more about assaults of staff members, either in those motels you described, and even in police stations and in group homes. So I'm curious if there's been an increase in the requests for charges, which would then make somebody who is maybe seriously emotionally disturbed would then become a delinquent, because now they've been charged with a delinquent act.
Well,
be interested.
Let me, if I could, Senator. There was an incident that just happened, but I'll let Commissioner Brown fill you in on that. I think he might be. It might be better for him to discuss that in a hotel situation. But I also Peppers on. I see he's here now. He may know about the case homes and whether there has been any increase in assaults there. But I
don't plan to end the conversation today about juvenile justice. So perhaps you guys could poll the state's attorneys if you could, and see what we come up with.
Okay.
Commissioner Brown thank you, John, for jumping out of turn. Appreciate it.
No
Commissioner
problem.
Brown has joined us, and if you're ready, Commissioner. There is a document, Woodside replacement report, that you can find on your screen. I mean, on your on the committee web page. Commissioner, I think you're still muted.
I apologize. I thought I was unmuted there.
I did the same thing this morning during the session.
So good morning. For the record, Sean Brown, Commissioner for the Department for Children and Families. We have provided several documents for the committee this morning. We have a PowerPoint which we can review. We have a residential placements PowerPoint, and then also we provided an overview of the program that's being developed for the Woodside replacement with Beckett. And so I know we have Jeff and Jay from Beckett with us as well. And also today, we have Jennifer Micah, the General Counsel for the Department for Children and Families, and then also Jennifer Herbert, who is the new DCF Clinical Director, who's been very involved in the work and the design of the new facility in Newberry, and working with Beckett and BGS and our Council of Juvenile Justice Administrators, consultants, and then also working with the Beckett treatment team and developing the program, which, if there's time today, we can review with the committee. Following up on the conversation, that you were having at the start, Senator, I would point out that we are seeing an increase of youth on the chin side who are exhibiting aggressive behaviors more than we've seen in the recent past. That is certainly leading to a lot of challenges in the way we care for youth and meet their needs. And so I do want to just share that we are experiencing an uptick of youth on the chin side. And as you aptly pointed out, it does lead to concerns that if they act out those youth on their aggression, that it could lead to them becoming involved in the juvenile justice system, which obviously we all want to prevent from happening. We all want to make sure they're receiving the treatment that they need to move forward, and certainly don't want to see them becoming involved with the juvenile justice system. So all of our work really revolves around trying to stabilize them and move them forward in the providing of services so that they can be maintained in the least restrictive setting. And for many of them, we want them to return to a community placement as soon as possible.
Getting right to the Woodside replacement, we got to find a new name for this agenda item since Woodside no longer exists.
As you will see in the PowerPoint, and we can probably start referring to it, but we have started calling the new program in Newberry that we're working to stand up the Covered Bridge Treatment Center. That was the name developed in conjunction with the Beckett team. So we can moving forward refer to it as the Covered Bridge Treatment Center.
Okay. Senator White have a question or a comment?
I just had a question about, given the fact that it's going to take a year or 2 years before this is even online, and the we just had 12, I don't know how many kids we're talking about here, but we just had 12 secure level 1 beds that are about to come online at the retreat. Why can't, in the their new beds, so why can't we use those beds instead of hotels and hospitals and police stations? And also the retreat closed a couple of their units at the behest of the state. So there are units at the retreat that are also not filled. Just a question.
That is correct. It is a complicated set of circumstances and an array of services that we use for our youth, Senator White. In terms of the inpatient unit that the retreat is closing down, it was really being underutilized given the level of care it provided. And to keep it open would have increased the cost exponentially for the state. And all involved agreed it probably made sense to wind that program down while maintaining services for some of our younger youth in our care and custody. And
no. I didn't mean the youth residential program. I meant there's also another unit that they closed, and I'm not suggesting that it wasn't right to close those down. What I'm suggesting is that there is space, and there's 2 places where there's space at the retreat. And we just heard John Campbell say that people are being housed at hotels on very unsafe situations, and that it'll be 2 years before the Covered Bridge project is done. So I'm saying, that's all.
Can I suggest that we need a second meeting, and I hope to convene one on this issue with Monica Hunt and Sarah Squirrel and Commissioner Brown, and perhaps, both Campbell and somebody from the Defender General's office, the Juvenile Defender's office, to talk about how we get through this interim, but also to learn more about what's available at the retreat, and how kids, my experience with the retreat was that kids could check themselves out back in the day.
Yeah, and it may make sense just to jump right into the Woodside replacement PowerPoint status report.
Yeah.
More than happy to. I didn't know if
Peggy, would you keep Peggy, if you just keep that in mind, to have that meeting perhaps end of next week or the following week to continue this discussion.
And I didn't know if Peggy could pull up the PowerPoint and I can walk you kind of through that.
Sure.
Sure. Thank you,
okay.
Peggy.
Do you see it?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. Yep. So if we just jump to the next page real quickly, just to provide background of where we've been in the last 6 months. A decision was made in August to stop admissions to the facility at the end of August. And then in the legislature's restatement budget, we received authorization to permanently cease operations at the facility by October 18th. We permanently closed the facility on October 17th. And then we were also required to submit a report on our long-term plan for justice-involved youth. We submitted that report at the end of October. And then moving to the next slide, Peggy, and then we testified several times before the Joint Legislative Justice Oversight and Child Protection Committees, who then voted unanimously to approve our proposal for justice-involved youth on November 12th, with some conditions that are listed here, that we work with the local authorities in the community in Newberry, that we make sure all youth in our care and custody receive treatment in the least restrictive setting, that only justice-involved youth be placed at the facility, and that it be a no eject, no reject facility, and that in the facility in Newberry, that there be a clinical clinician with a PhD level overseeing the treatment program there, and that also that we negotiate the lease and the investment to make sure that our investment is protected in that facility. And so we are working through, and compliant, making sure we meet all of those conditions.
Before we go to the next page, are there any questions on the background? Could you, just for me, and given our earlier conversation, justice-involved youth, would a youth who prior being placed in a program, who then assaults a staff member or in a motel and assaults a staff, would that become if they're charged, would that become a justice-involved youth then? Even though they weren't originally?
If they were not originally, they could become justice-involved youth depending on the outcome if criminal charges follow a specific assault or event, but they certainly could be, and that's one of our concerns, is preventing any CHINS youth who are exhibiting aggressive behavior from entering the justice-involved system.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And then the Joint Fiscal Committee in November did approve the recommendation from the Joint Justice Oversight and Child Protection Committee. And we've been working with our partners, Beckett, BGS, the Architect Studio Nexus, and then our consultant from the Council of Juvenile Justice Administrators. We are very close to finalizing a design plan. We're hoping early next week that will be done, and then we will seek involvement with the community in Newberry and seek their approval. Beckett has been in contact with the leadership in Newberry, the Select Board, the Development Review Board, and the Zoning Board. And there are plans underway as once we have a final design and program description in place that they will meet with the community and hold community forums to share the information, the design, and the program that will be run in that facility. And we are working very closely, DCF with BGS, with Beckett, in negotiating the terms of the lease. And then also on moving forward with the renovations for the facility once the design is moved forward. And I would point out that we do have additional funds earmarked in the Budget Adjustment Act to help pay for those renovations. Our base budget from the restatement had approximately $1.2 million set aside for the renovations. And with the work with the architects and Beckett, those are looking like they'll be closer to 3.2 to 3.4. And we have $2 million in the budget adjustment request to pay for the renovations in that facility on the front end, instead of having them incorporated into the lease and paid over a period of time, which then would have added interest and profit on top of that for Beckett. And so it's going to be more cost effective for the state to make that investment on the front end as well. Also, our clinical director, Jennifer Herbert, along with Penny Sampson, who's a consultant from the Council for Juvenile Justice Administrators, and the executive director of the Beckett's Vermont Permanency Initiative, Laura A. Baker, have been working very closely and regularly to develop the clinical treatment program that will be delivered and the assessments that will be used. And that is one of the documents, the current draft of that work we've provided to the committee today. And if there's time and interest, we could certainly pull that up and have Beckett and our team walk you through that. In terms of next steps and a time frame, we're hoping, as I indicated, to finalize the floor plan, completing the schematic design. I guess wonder if you could move us to the next page, the next steps page, a little further down. Yep, right here. And then in February, the site plan, complete the site plan with a civil engineer, generate the construction design documents and specifications in February into March, submit for zoning permits during that same time frame, and then any building permits we need from the state, and then go out to bid in late April, and then in May start construction. Our hope is time frame is that we would be open by this time next year in operating the program.
So that would be winter of 2022.
Yes. We're
In the
hoping by
meantime-
the end of December of this year that we will be operational. We had hoped to be operational in the fall, but it's looking like, based on the current time frame, that we're looking towards the end of December. So a little around a year from now is our goal.
So and that would be 6 beds, correct?
6 beds, yes, for secure residential services for justice-involved youth.
And only justice-involved youth.
Correct. Including DOC youth as well.
Good. Thank you.
In terms of, yep.
Okay. No, I broke into I had another question, but go ahead.
Sure, go ahead, Senator.
I guess my question is, in the interim, between now and next January, let's say it's January, what is the plan for justice-involved youth? How are they being dealt with? We heard John Campbell talk about kids in motels, talked about needing transport to 204, and we have 204 here. That sort of thing.
Sure.
I'm sure for females, the Beckett School in Bennington, the Vermont School for Girls, I should know. It's in my neighborhood. I keep referring to it as the Bennington School, but it's not. They keep changing the name of it, but I actually have 3 buildings in my neighborhood, believe it or not.
Sure. So we've developed a wide variety of programming for youth, justice-involved youth. For those requiring the highest level of need, we have a contract with the Sununu facility in New Hampshire. We have utilized that once at the end of last summer into September for 1 youth. Since mid-September, we have not had any youth placed in the Sununu Center. We also have been utilizing the Turtle Rock crisis beds that we've developed with Washington County Mental Health. Between July 1st and now, we have placed 11 youth in those crisis beds. Of those, 3 were justice-involved youth. The other 8 were CHINS youth. Also, we worked with the SEAL Depot program down in your area, Senator, to create 3 crisis beds, and then also a 4th bed for youth that come in during the weekend or evening hours. We certainly have had a history at DCF of when a youth has come in to keep them sometimes in a police station. It made more sense there And so we've stopped that practice and under only very limited circumstances. And so that bed would be utilized for youth that come in at the last minute and juvenile justice involved, and that we would utilize that one crisis bed we've developed with the SEAL program down in Bennington. Also, we have 3 other beds that we've contracted with them in addition to their regular 14-bed program as well. We provided them a rate increase to help them meet the needs. Certainly, we've been seeing, it's more on the chin side as we started to talk about. We're seeing youth on the chin side with some really challenging behaviors as a result of their need for services. And so we certainly want to provide services in the least restrictive environment and get them back to their community placements as soon as possible. But some of them end up in the crisis beds at Turtle Rock, but also we've been utilizing those 3 crisis beds as well in the depot program down in Bennington. We're certainly seeing challenges overall from the pandemic on staffing. They've had a few outbreaks amongst their staff down there, which has certainly been a challenge, and we're seeing in that other areas as well. So the pandemic itself is putting stress on the system, just in terms of staffing and whatnot. In terms of justice involved youth, as you will see from another PowerPoint that we'll put up, that's really a small sliver of the number of youth that we're serving right now through our residential programs. Most of them are on the chin side. And so that's why we've had very little utilization of the Sununu program. We've certainly recently came close to looking to place 1 youth in Sununu, but we were able to de-escalate that situation and maintain them in state. There has been some discussion regarding a recent incident with a youth in a motel. That was not a justice involved youth. I just want to be clear about that. That was a youth we were stepping down from another program who'd been stable for some time. And looking to move them into a high-end foster placement. And while we were waiting for that to be available, we needed to place that youth in a motel with FSD support, staff support. And unfortunately, that youth did assault one of our staff members, and it was a very traumatic experience for that staff person. But it was not a justice-involved youth at the time that occurred.
I guess that leads to several questions, but in full disclosure, I did get a call from someone through the VSEA last night after I spoke with you on the phone, who was concerned about the safety of the staff and whether or not putting, and I don't know who I don't want to know the names of the staff, obviously, but were they caseworkers? Were they former Woodside staff? What level of experience do they have in caring for somebody in that situation?
These were our frontline social workers who work our CHINS caseload, which this youth was. I will indicate that we have made it clear that we will no longer allow the placement of youth in motels. And that I have asked our family services leadership team to quickly develop some community alternatives that we can quickly stand up and staff with not using motels and not using our staff on nights and weekends to care for youth in that way. We certainly understand the difficulty of using our staff after hours in this way. And certainly it's a practice that has occurred for a long period of time, even when other programs were open, just based on the circumstances. But moving forward, we'll not be using motels for the placement of youth, nor do we want them staying in police stations, overnight pending a court appearance or a placement the next day.
If you could prepare a report on problems with transports for me, I'm going to be working on that as part of my work in the Senate Appropriations Committee. I'm really concerned about transports statewide, not just DCF kids.
Yes, certainly. We're happy to provide you some information regarding that.
So if there's any, I would like that for when we get to that issue of budget area. is it, I can't, I keep calling him Senator Campbell because he was a senator for so long. John mentioned problems with getting transport deputies, and that was a reason to leave kids in a police station rather than bring them to Bennington or wherever the program might be. Is that a continued problem for you?
We did experience some issues regarding transport several months ago. We worked with the sheriff's department, particularly Sheriff Marcoux, to set up an after-hours system to make sure that we can have access to transport when needed for our youth. And I think we're going to have some further follow-up conversations with Sheriff Marcoux and our security consultant to make sure that those transports are available 24/7. There was a,
as I said, I'm really would like to work with you as well as the state's attorneys and sheriff's department on this issue with transports. I've heard good things about Sheriff Marcoux and Sheriff, is it Anderson in Windham County, Senator White? Both stepping up on transports, but others kind of stepping down.
Yeah, I would say one of the things we're seeing, and this is just from the broader DCF and Agency of Human Services perspective, we've been relying on the sheriff's departments across the state and contracting to provide a level of security, given the large number of households we're housing in motels. And we've seen some issues. And so we're putting tremendous pressure on the staffing levels in response to the pandemic. And I think, we're seeing the impacts of the pandemic in many areas of our systems of care. And I think we're seeing that in the transport realm as well.
Final question from me, and then maybe others do. Do you have a backup plan if the community says absolutely not to the Covered Bridge Treatment Center?
We are working through contingency plans. We were having conversations with other providers at the time. And so those conversations have been left on hold, but there has certainly been interest from other providers to work with us. But we felt like Beckett was the best program and the best facility. But there have been other conversations so that we would be able to move in a different direction if there are issues with the placement of this treatment program in that community.
Other questions for Commissioner Brown from the committee? Did you have any of your other staff who would like to make comments, Commissioner?
I would, before we move on, just pull up the placement sheet just for the committee's information to understand the wide variety of programs we use for the placement of youth, whether they are CHINs or juvenile justice involved. I think it would be helpful to provide some perspective on the number of youth that we're serving and the different programs we utilize to meet their needs in state and out of state. So Peggy,
you pull that up, Peggy or Sean? Thank you.
Yep. So we currently have, so the top part of this sheet are programs that we utilize in state, and the number of youth and the focus for the treatment of that program where we place youth, and that's in the light blue above. If you look down below, you will see our out-of-state placement for youth. And again, a quick summary of the type of program that center provides. As you'll see, overall, we have 148 youth placed in residential placements in state and out of state. Of those, 117 are CHINs cases and 31 are delinquent or justice involved youth. The bulk, a little more than half of those are in state, and then less than half are out of state. And as you can see, the programs we contract with out of state are really provide a higher level of service for some of our youth with unique needs that we just don't have the the ability to provide that level, given the small number of youth needing that level of care in state. And
Commissioner, is that the correct date, May 20th, 2020?
I think that date did not get updated when this is a sheet we maintain, so I apologize. So,
Okay, you know what, this is fairly current then.
yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I was wondering
Yes, I
why.
apologize. I missed that when we were sending it to the committee. So
Oh, okay, good.
this is a sheet that we use regularly to kind of track our youth and the different
Oh,
programs
okay,
we're in,
good.
and so I think we've just missed updating that date.
Okay. So that means that out of the 15 delinquents, 5 were in Seall, 2 were in Windsor, 1 in Turtle Rock,
Mhm.
1 in Laraway, Footbrook, and 1 in Allenbrook. Would you have enough to fill 6 beds at Covered Bridge Treatment?
Yeah, I mean, the covered bridge treatment program is really designed not to be a long-term, but a short-term. And so there would be youth, coming in and being stabilized. So we would certainly be utilizing between 3 and 6 at any time as youth experience crisis or whatnot. So we believe 6 beds is the right size. Before we closed Woodside last summer, we had 5 youth at Woodside. And so I think, and that was a high number for the last year or so, but we think it's important to make sure we have capacity because youth come into crisis for a variety of reasons at any time, and we need to be prepared to meet their needs. And so, and our goal is not to keep youth there long-term, but to stabilize them, get them into a treatment program, and then move them to a less restrictive setting as quickly as possible when it's appropriate, so that they can continue their progress in the least restrictive setting, whether that's a lower level residential program in state or whether it might be a higher level therapeutic foster home type situation if they're not able to return home to their biological household.
Thank you. Other questions for the commissioner? This has been helpful to me anyway.
Yeah.
Getting a picture of where we're at. Why don't the next person on the agenda is Jim Henry from Seall Inc., or as I refer to it, 204 Depot Street in Bennington.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm James Henry, Seall Incorporated, which is a 204, 206 Depot Street programs, as well as GAP and Horizon programs. I would agree with the earlier conversation in regards to the chins being a little more on the aggressive side, which definitely makes it a little more difficult to work with those youth, especially with where to go, if they're not fitting in with us and what we can do with them, especially if they're not charged based on some of their behaviors. But we're basically 2 months in to the 206 delinquent program, the 206 house. We currently have 3. And I think so far, knock on wood, things are going okay. Not that we haven't had our moments, but I think we're doing okay. Definitely run into some staffing issues. We had hired 46 staff last year and we lost 50. So we definitely struggle in the staffing department. We're actually working on putting together a report to see where we're losing all these people to. Are they being terminated? Are they, resigning? But overall, definitely struggle in the staff aspect of it, which can lead to, some burnout, especially when we do have some of the difficult kids between the 204 and the 206 house. So, and just for, I guess, a little background, 204 is generally the house for most of the chins, with the delinquent labeled youth would be at 206.
Jim, I'm struck by the staff problem.
Yeah.
I would be personally obviously I'm interested personally, but I'm curious if salary is a problem in terms of keeping them. I know you've just out of the grapevine, I know you've lost a few staff to DCF. So is salary a problem? That's one question. And is the aggressive nature of many of these youth becoming a problem, increased need to restrain, etc.? I mean, is that a reason for the people leaving? I'm sure there's always, anytime you have turnover, there's something's going on, but.
Well, to touch on the salary aspect, we had a pretty significant salary increase. I want to say it was 2 years ago, where we basically start at $15 an hour for somebody coming in without any experience. And we all seem to think, our little team here seem to think that it's not necessarily the money, in a sense. I think the hours are difficult, where you have to require some of the weekend hours, second shift hours as such. Benefits may have been a little tricky on in some aspects, having having our budgeted amount of full-time staff. So rely on the part-timers that don't get the benefits. And I believe it was about a year or so ago, up until that point, we were able to pay 100% of the insurance for an individual. And based on the increased number, I believe we have 79 staff now. Probably 70 of that would be designated DCF, in the programs and not administration. So our numbers have definitely increased. So we were not able to afford to, keep paying the insurance on the staff. So I guess in some cases it might have looked like that employees may even have lost a little money, even with a $15 start, per hour, but then have to pay their own insurance. But we are trying to put together a little report, and by all means we can send it out to you once we get it, finalized, to look at where we losing staff.
I think salary wise, I would not. I think that we need to do better given the kids that you're being asked to deal with.
Yeah, we basically have like a $15 to $19 pay scale, depending on the experience and education, that and kind of fit people into that aspect. The aggressive. Let's see. The second question towards the aggressive side. We have had some assaults, residents assaulting staff, and that's not included where it might be a restraint. This would be a physical assault where a resident had attacked a staff member. One of them was our program manager. And we do struggle with sometimes getting them charged, which would then allow us to get them removed, in a sense, because then they would have the delinquency aspect to it. But basically, unless it's a real difficult situation, we hang on to these guys and guys and gals. We've had 2 recent issues with some very difficult staff where we were able to remove them. I believe one went to Turtle Rock.
You mean difficult kids? You said staff.
Yeah, significant. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, 2 significant residents that we removed. Couple $1,000s worth of property damage, and he basically was a 15-year-old struggling with a father who is stage 4 cancer and dying. The mother is not in the picture, so he really doesn't care what happens to him, and his behavior dictates that. So we struggle with the behaviors that he's done, the possible restraints with that individual. But we were able to remove him, and I believe he was the one that went to Turtle Rock. The other youth, we were able to keep working with him through some of the difficulties of his aggressive behaviors, mostly property damage. And I believe he ended up going to maybe Tennessee last Monday or so. But that's basically where we would struggle with, if we had the wood side in place, where we would be able to remove some of these youth based on these difficult behaviors.
Questions for Jim? Thank you. No question. Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it. We look forward to hearing a little bit more about staff and why they've left. That's a huge chunk.
All right, thanks for the invite.
Thank you. Jay Walter is the Executive Director or Chief Administrative Officer of the Beckett School. Jay, thanks for joining us. You're still muted, sir. Thank you for joining us, Jay, and I appreciate it. We were hoping to get an update both on, you also have the Beckett School as well as, which has, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but it was a sizable number of Vermont kids in New Hampshire, which is close to Vermont, as well as the Bennington School for Girls, or the Vermont School for Girls.
Yep.
So you're in both places here. You're starting a new program, and then you've got Vermont kids in two of your other programs.
Sure. I mean, just briefly, I think I would certainly echo a lot of Jim's comments relative to the youth. I also have Jeff Karen and Lorraine Coburn available. Lorraine oversees the program in Vermont under Jeff's tutelage, the Vermont School for Girls, as well as our New England School for Girls program, which serves primarily out-of-state children. Jeff broadly oversees our children's services as the president of Mount Prospect Academy, which I know the lingo gets confusing, but Mount Prospect Academy really is the company that oversees most of our children's residential services. Jeff is the president of that company, and he can speak much better than I, sort of an administrative person, relative to any questions you have along the lines of Jim's testimony. I certainly, in terms of the project, I'm not sure, how much to add beyond what Sean has already very capably articulated. I know one of the concerns is to make sure that we vet this locally. I am in regular contact with Alma from the select board. We went through and analyzed how procedurally to proceed, and are in agreement that we wish to vet this through a process at the select board level, not the DRB, which is the developmental review board level. That process will be kept more focused on the site plan and the physical plan, and be more traditional zoning kind of dialogue. I think that process is likely to commence in the next couple weeks at the select board level. Alma and I have had dialogue by email this week. We're trying to sort out the best way to present right now with COVID, and whether we're going to do a webinar, which is kind of a foreign concept to me. And so we're going to need a little bit of support from our IT team to kind of put that kind of thing together so that the community can, interface in a way that's better than Zoom. So there's some technological issues we're dealing with due to the pandemic. I would comment on Jim's stuff just from a business standpoint, kind of a cost standpoint, that we certainly, in terms of this program design, have sought to address some of those issues. But the industry in general, I think, is starting to face some issues beyond just the classic pay benefit issues due to the pandemic that I think people should begin to be aware of. The big unemployment support that we've provided the population in this country, appropriately so, does have a trickle-down effect. Vermont unemployment insurance rates are extraordinarily high. We actually self-insure through a nonprofit mechanism that has significantly reduced our costs versus if we were just in the pool. But due to the unemployment, significant unemployment claims, a lot of those opportunities are being lost or resulting in significantly higher rates. So all the success we had in running to that program is, for us, thousands and thousands of dollars is being lost. The impact on insurance and workers' comp rates to these aggression issues are also things that, were being pushed significantly by the insurance companies these days relative to risk. There's only one or two carriers for social services agencies in the country right now who are willing to take on the kind of liabilities. Being, Hanover and Philadelphia are the two primaries. And we're getting a lot of feedback that they are very nervous about litigation and liabilities associated with staff being hurt, as well as claims by children of abuse and neglect. And really the evolving expectations of trying to balance when to hold a child, when to isolate a child, and maintain community safety and individual safety, and how that's being interpreted. So, there's some trends in the industry that, I guess, you're asking questions about the business, and I thought were apropos to the discussion, that it's a rapidly evolving environment, with more and more stakeholders engaged in the dialogue. And people like Jim and Jeff and Lorraine face, just a lot of challenges in terms of getting everybody across the spectrum, from the legislatures on down to the advocacy groups, to the parents, to the communities, all on the same page. It's quite interesting to see this unfold. And it's all going to play out, and it's all going to play out in this particular project, perhaps more so than even we're experiencing. So,
Full disclosure, since you don't know me, up until 2006, I was the executive director of COA, and I ran the program from 1971 to 2006. The industry, using that term, has changed dramatically in those 14 years. I must say, and hearing, and I know Jim fairly well, and hearing some of the issues they're facing, but you described another one, which is getting insurance to cover the liabilities. Also, workers' comp is increasing cost to you all, as well as other issues. Maybe Jeff can speak a little bit to. I know you've had assaultive kids as well in programs. I know in Bennington anyway. As I said, 3 of your buildings are in my neighborhood. I live on Madison Road. You have 2 buildings on Madison Road, and you have one on College Road, which is right behind me. So, and I'll be the first to say, we the neighbors have not had problems from your programs. Once in a while, a runaway, that we see the police out looking or something like that. I must say that the years that your programs have been in this neighborhood, we have not seen problems. So that speaks volumes for the type of facilities you both run, both in Depot as well as in Bennington School for Girls and other programs.
Thank you, Senator. What would you like me to?
Well, if you could talk a little bit about some of the challenges you're facing, trying to make it from here to the opening of the covered bridge treatment facility.
Well, I believe we can staff the facility relatively easy. I'm not concerned about staffing the facility. To discuss a little bit about what Jay was referring to when we're talking about risk management for any program, James' program in Bennington, Lorraine's program in Bennington, when you have a risk manager on the insurance level coming in and you're presenting him with how many assaulted faculty you've had, and that number doesn't decrease, it usually stays the same. It takes them several go-arounds to understand what kind of students you have. So for risk management, that's always a factor, but that was a factor back in your day, I'm sure, as well. And it takes very committed human beings to work with our kids, despite the abuse our faculty suffer on a daily basis. But we just encourage them that abuse leaves in a while for every child. They kind of go through a cycle and they get upset at you. And then once they trust you and connect with you, then you make a bond. And so if you can keep a faculty member there for half a year to a year, they generally understand and get an intrinsic value from connecting with our kids. And for us on the New Hampshire end and the Vermont end, Vermont does a wonderful job of retaining staff. And we can spend an hour on why that is. And in New Hampshire, I think like James, I have some programs that are more geared towards more of our intensive, violent, assaultive kids. That's up in the 40 percentile for faculty leaving turnover rate. And our more assessment programs geared towards kids coming in, get them stabilized and assessing them, we have zero turnover rate in those programs for faculty. So just like anyone here would just guess, the more violent the child, the more turnover you're going to get. That's because we have a wide variety of citizens that work with us, from 65 years of age, male and female, all the way down to 24 right out of college. And so, although probably you and I, Senator, we took a lot of punches in the day. Some folks they weren't domesticated that way. They just don't understand why they should be assaulted at work. So generally takes somebody like Lorraine with a good sense of humor, just to expect it a little bit, and James. But again, as we're moving forward, I have the privilege of having Jay worry about risk management and the insurance couriers, of which we only have 2. So we really can't be that bad, or we're going to get dropped. So that puts pressure on me operationally to make sure that we run the safest programs we can. And from what I'm told by insurance carriers, we do a good job. And so I expect to put forth the same, if not more stringent, risk management strategies in the Covered Bridge program. And again, it's a 6-bed program. It's incredibly intimate because it's so small, which is awesome. And the site is wonderful, and we appreciate and respect the amount of resources going into that building. Jay and I certainly aren't used to that. We usually fix up a building as we kind of go, and move kids out of bedrooms and refix the bedrooms and kind of go at that rate. But so this is a luxury to have a certain amount of time with some engineers to respectfully engineer some space that these children can receive a good intake, have a treatment team analyze what their major issues are, and then work on the major ones, decrease the aggression, and get them to a lesser restrictive facility in the shortest amount of time. And and that's fun for us. So we, that's been our model for forever. So
Great. I wonder if there's any questions for either you or Lori. Senator White.
Oh, no, I had a question for Mr. Walter and the commissioner. So,
Go ahead.
so I should have thought of this before, but I was surprised when you talked about meeting with the community people, because in my other life, I've worked on a number of projects like this that are to be cited in a community. And I think that I heard that you are hoping to start construction in May. And this is February, so you have February, March, and April, and you have to go out for bids, and the community has not even been, they haven't been involved up to this point, is my understanding. So how on earth are you going to go out to start construction on May? Because going out to bid takes a couple months in itself, and this is February. So I'm concerned about what would happen, because I have seen projects like this be completely turned down by a community, and I'm a little bit nervous about your time frame.
So I'll jump in here, and then Jay jump in as well. Beckett, this isn't in terms of the use we're anticipating for this facility in Newberry. Beckett has owned this property for several years, and they have run several different types of residential programs there already. The most recent iteration was an assessment center for some younger youth, but before that, they also ran some other type of residential programming. So for the community, this has already been this type of program. The anticipated use now will be smaller than those prior uses. And Jay, please feel free to jump in here. So the community has experience working with Beckett and Newberry, and they're running programs. And so it'll be more of educating them on the switch of the use and the decrease in the capacity that's going to be served in that program. And then just given, I think for us, we want to make sure they're comfortable with the renovations we're proposing. It won't look much different from the outside than it does now. There'll be some structural changes to the facility, but I'll kind of let Jay weigh in on his relationship with the community over time and their running of programs there. So this isn't a new concept for the community.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would comment. I mean, I would echo Sean's comments. I think that they, accurately present a lot of the facts. The reality is, I think, one thing we as a company have done, notwithstanding being a nonprofit, we've always paid property taxes. We've always fought with the funding agencies for funding to do so, or if we didn't get the funding, we paid them anyway, because we wanted to respect that issue in the community. That's gone a long way in towns like Newberry, where we've already been in towards sort of putting to rest and creating some trust, because that issue is so big in New England, in particular in Vermont and New Hampshire. Because we've had programs there, and because I think we select sites that we try to minimize community impact, we try to create open space. I think that people in this neighborhood, and I think Dick, you've seen it down in Brattleboro and Bennington, we try to improve the properties. We try to make the places better than we got them. And I think there's a general understanding of that. And we really haven't had a lot of issues in that community. And we have been behind the scenes talking to people. And there doesn't appear to be a great deal of angst in the community, although there are people asking questions. My approach has been, let's get the site plan and the project plan nailed down, because I know one thing in my experience with working with community people is they don't like being told one thing and then seeing another thing. They feel like a bait and switch, and we want to avoid at all costs sort of that approach. The actual legal zoning issues here are actually fairly minor, because we have a permit for this particular use already. It's really, we are cited as a 12-bed residential treatment facility, which is exactly how this program is going to be licensed. So it's really an amendment of the license. And I've spoken to both DRB and the zoning board about how they'd like us to proceed. And I think we're pretty comfortable that that's not going to be the holdup. Now, if there's opposition that arises, you know, I don't, it's going to arise, and I think the legal processes in that community will advise us as to how to proceed and ultimately make a decision. I'm very confident that this will go through, but I'm not positive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There will always be opposition to anything, but, and I guess I missed somewhere along the line the fact that you'd already had programming there before. And so I was thinking of this as a new concept to the community. So thank you.
Yeah, I know. You've always had neighborhood concerns, and you try to address them as best you can. As I said, I'm a neighbor of your programs, and our concern is always various things, but you live with that. In 1971, it was a lot different opening a program in downtown Bennington than it is today, and it was kind of unheard of. Any other questions for the group at Beckett before we go to Marshall Paul, the juvenile defender? I do want to continue this conversation. I am especially concerned about the aggressive. I guess we're using the term aggressive. I think it's much more than that. I think that we have some extremely seriously emotionally disturbed kids in the system who are being asked to be dealt with by DCF, who, if not treated and don't make changes, are going to be in our adult correction system before long. And I want to continue that discussion in the near future regarding the role of DMH, DCF, and Department of Aging and Independent Living. And just as DOC is the institution of last resort, I'm getting a feeling that DCF has become an institution of last resort, and maybe it's not always appropriate. The help from all of you at Beckett and Seal, you are on the front lines, you see it, you know who you're dealing with. We really don't. And so any information you can give us about the types of kids you're being asked to deal with. And I will add that Senator Nitka has long experience in the juvenile system. She is a social worker. She's worked for various groups over the years.
Yeah, I've been at Beckett's program in New Hampshire. It's quite a long time ago, but did a nice job.
Marshall, welcome.
Thank you, Senator. So by way of introduction, I'm Marshall Paul. I'm the Deputy Defender General and Chief Juvenile Defender. And I'll start by saying what I've said the last few times I've testified, which is that we are very happy to generally support the direction that this project has been going in. We're supportive of the effort to close Woodside, to move on to a facility that is sized better and designed better for the population of kids that it is serving. And so, with that said, we certainly have been cautious in our support. We've been reviewing the proposals that DCF has put forward, their plans, their intentions going forward. And honestly, while we certainly share some of the small concerns that are outlined in the Disability Rights Vermont testimony that's on the website, we don't see those as major hurdles. What those are, to our mind, sort of small disagreements as to approach. So my point by sort of highlighting that is to say that we're looking at this carefully and we're cautious, and we have certain aspects of this that we're waiting to see how it develops and that we have questions about. But we're actually extraordinarily pleased with the direction that this has gone so far. That said, I'll touch on a few of the issues that have been raised today, and I think the primary one is the distinction between the CHINS population and the juvenile justice population, and how those two fit into our sort of constellation of residential placements. And honestly, some of this, I've got to share, before I was juvenile defender, before I went to law school, I was a behavioral interventionist at the Howard Center, working mostly with what we would consider to be the CHINS population. And even going back then, which was sort of mid to early 2000s, you were talking about a population of kids who were really deeply traumatized, really deeply affected, and have a lot of problems in their life that they're going to have to overcome. And that led to them being, honestly, a far more difficult group of kids, and honestly, a far more physically aggressive group of kids than the older, slightly more sophisticated, justice-involved youth that we were seeing when I started as a lawyer, visiting Woodside and working with kids at Woodside and working with other justice-involved kids in other settings. It's natural when you consider sort of how people wind up in these various placements. Those kids that are coming through the CHINS system, those are especially the ones who are in that sort of early adolescent or pre-adolescent age. Those are kids who, in order for them to wind up in custody and in a residential facility, they are, almost all of them have really suffered tremendous trauma, have really suffered tremendous harm, have really suffered tremendous hurt, and they lash out in a way that's entirely predictable when you keep that in mind. I remember when I was doing my training at the Howard Center, we had a week-long training in de-escalation and restraint and appropriate uses of restraint and appropriate uses of seclusion and, ways to de-escalate situations so that you never even wind up in that situation. And I asked the question, I asked, they were describing all of the ways to block punches and restrain kids safely. And I asked the question of people who are training, should I be expecting that I'm going to get punched here? Is that why you're teaching me this? And they stopped everything and said, yeah, of course that's why we're teaching you this. Why the heck do you think we're teaching you how to block punches if we don't expect that you are going to be dealing with physically aggressive kids who are going to get physically aggressive with you? And that's going to be something that's part of your job to deal with. And that is, wherever these kids are, whether they're at the retreat, whether they find their way into the justice system and wind up at Woodside, whether they remain in the CHINS system and are in specialized treatment programs that really are focused on the trauma and therapy that those kids need. They're going to be aggressive. There are going to be assaults. There are going to be physically aggressive situations that fall somewhere short of an assault. And honestly, that's the work. That's the work that the people who are there supervising, treating, and administering these programs do. And it's not like there's any silver bullet, like you can create some program that will eliminate that aggressiveness or eliminate those problems. It's more a question of how do you deal with it. And it happens that I was on a phone call yesterday afternoon. I do a monthly phone call with sort of my counterparts in New England, chief juvenile defenders in all the other New England states. And the topic came up about placement stability and how the various states were dealing with placement issues. And honestly, during the pandemic, nobody is having an easy go of it. All over New England, all the other juvenile defenders were reporting the same kind of stuff that's been discussed here. that there's been staffing problems at programs due to the pandemic and due to some of the collateral issues that surround the pandemic. That's led to some programs, not necessarily discharging people, but refusing new admissions. That's led to programs, refusing the admission of kids who were particularly higher need, but who they might have accepted in the past, but due to their staffing levels and due to the difficulties in finding staff at this moment, they would not accept those kids. So to the extent that what we're seeing is sort of some real pandemic-related challenges to our ability to place kids in appropriate programs, that's not just a problem in Vermont. That's a problem that's being experienced certainly region-wide, and I wouldn't doubt that it's a problem that's being experienced nationwide.
Well, can I just break in, Marshall? I can't hold my thoughts any longer. I think what's missing from your discussion is accountability. How do we hold these kids accountable for that behavior? It's fine. Yes, we expect that some kids are going to act out aggressively. But it seems that programs are having difficulty holding those kids accountable. And when you have assaultive behavior, like what occurred with the what Commissioner Brown just described, when you have other behaviors, if you can't hold kids accountable, what is to prevent that from continuing? And I guess I'm sounding old-fashioned, but we used to have a thing called sitting in the dining room. I know it wasn't isolation because everybody had to walk through the dining room. But I started that in 1971 because I couldn't have them go out back and dig a 6-foot hole, 6 foot wide and 6 foot deep like we did at the Lakeside Center, where we basically had sand in Burlington. But there has to be something to hold kids accountable. And I'm hearing from those that are working in the industry, that's one of the frustrations.
I think there's two answers to that question, Senator, and that is that there's certainly those situations that cross the line from the sort of expected and even therapeutically appropriate aggressiveness and resistance that sometimes manifests itself physically, but is really part of the overall sort of progress of treatment of some of these kids, versus the more escalated stuff like, that attack that's been described with the child who was in the motel and assaulted a DCF staff member. There's a point where absolutely, a kid might engage in behavior that is the only appropriate way to handle it is to charge them and for them to be dealt with through the justice system. But I think that what the flip side of that, and I don't think that this is any, I think certainly Senator Sears, this wouldn't be news to you, nor to anyone else who's worked in this field, is that in a lot of cases, the accountability is actually, it's best not to be removing kids from these programs, plunking them into, the category of justice-involved youth, because in a lot of cases, that physical aggressiveness and the response to it is actually part of therapeutic progress, that it's important to address the harm that kids cause in a residential program, in the actual milieu of that program, and to provide that accountability in that program. Honestly, you gave an example of it with the timeout in the sitting in the dining room. That may be one very appropriate in certain circumstances way to de-escalate a aggressive situation, remove a kid from one physical place to a different physical place where maybe they won't be affected by the same stimulus, and start to process with that kid what they actually went through, why they engaged in the behavior they engaged in, what strategies can be used to prevent that in the future. If the response is always, oh, the moment a kid becomes physical, we remove them from the program and put them in some sort of an escalated, or more restrictive environment, like taking a kid from a residential program that's really suited to their therapeutic needs and moving them into a justice involved youth program that's really about containment and safety. You're actually doing more harm than good, because you are essentially stopping that kid's therapeutic progress, or at least interrupting it. Because it certainly, and I'm sure everyone who's in the meeting who's been involved in this work can tell you, it's not a short process to develop a therapeutic relationship with a kid. And so if a kid gets moved from program to program to program, every time that they display any aggression, you're essentially ensuring that no program is ever going to develop a therapeutic relationship with that kid, and that kid is never going to make the progress that they need to make. And so I think it's not a new approach to say we try to keep these kids in these programs, deal with their behaviors within the programs as best we can, use those behaviors as actually opportunities to make therapeutic progress and to make really positive change. That's not a new concept. That's been certainly how these types of programs have worked since I first interacted with them in the early 2000s, and it continues to be how they work today. So to me, the short answer is that we need to keep dealing with it the way it's always been dealt with, which is draw a line, and when kids cross that line and it becomes inappropriate and unsafe for them to be anywhere besides a secure justice-involved youth facility, then okay, that makes sense. And up to that line, we got to keep trying to work with these kids in the programs they're in, as long as those programs remain appropriate, and trying to keep making the progress that we can make with those kids so that they can step down and step back into the community, and not wind up sort of escalating through the juvenile justice system into the criminal justice system. And I think the most important part of that is having a system of residential care that actually provides everything that we need, so that we have placements that have the specialized treatment available for all the kids that we need to place. Because that's, I can tell you my experience with the kids, both kids at Woodside, justice involved youth and other programs, and kids coming out of the CHIN system, abused and neglected youth, is that we see the most aggressive behavior and the most problems in a residential program when kids are placed inappropriately. It's the kind of stuff that you see when kids have remained in a program too long and are really no longer making therapeutic progress, or when they're initially first placed in a program that turns out to really not suit that kid's needs. That's where we start to see the aggression. And sometimes the aggression really comes in a way that's therapeutically appropriate. I can't count the number of times I've had clinicians talk to me as a kid's lawyer and say, look, just to warn you, we expect as we start to dig into this kid's trauma history that there's going to be aggressive behavior. And you're going to hear about that as the kid's lawyer. And, we want you to understand that that's expected in certain circumstances, because that's the very nature of trying to address trauma that's been experienced but never processed and never treated for years and years and years.
As long as it gets treated.
As long as it gets treated.
And as long as, I'm an old Glasser type person who believes in accepting responsibility. Anyhow, Marshall, thank you so much. It's always interesting to have that conversation. I am concerned about the future, getting from step A to step B, which step A was closing Woodside, step B is opening something else. I'll have to get the covered bridge down properly in the lexicon, but how we get from there in the next year or whatever it takes to open it, and how many kids, placed. And my understanding is that some of the problems are transportation problems, and you're right that COVID certainly has exasperated a lot of these problems for these programs. We have people who are working front lines, either at 204. I'll keep calling it 204. I can't call it see all anymore. And the Bennington School for Girls. We're working on the front lines and watching other people collecting huge unemployment checks. And I don't begrudge those folks getting those unemployment checks, but when you're paying $15 to $16 or $17 an hour, you add that up and compare that with a $600 bonus to whatever unemployment was paid. And you're sitting there taking abuse from those kids. As difficult as that is, I have to have sympathy for those workers. And that's why I'm hoping that I really think you need to do much better, at least temporarily, than this 15 or 16 or so, whatever you pay at the Bennington School for Girls. We need to do much better because these folks are, particularly those that have hung around there for the whole year of this pandemic, put in some amazing work. So Commissioner, I hope you'll take that to heart, as well as when you see that kind of turnover, if you're getting that, it's concerning. And it may not be just pay, but I know people look at that issue. Jay brought up the unemployment. I think that's an important factor in trying to keep people in your programs. If you wanted to comment on that, Jay or Jeff or Laura, Jim, anybody who wants to comment on that?
If I could just jump in, Senator, your point is well taken, and I can't emphasize enough at the partnership with the CL program and Beckett with the Vermont School for Girls and the program they run in New Hampshire that serves many of our youth. Their programs and their staff really have stepped up during the pandemic, been on the front lines. And I'm happy to look at if there's a way that we can, try to recognize that work of their staff over the last year, just as we have in some of the other programs we've administered, in terms of stabilization or incentive pay. And I'm certainly willing to have those conversations for sure.
I hope you will. And as the next round of CARES fund comes, and we look at groups, I don't think, I would be really appreciated as we look at this, especially trying to get from here to there. Hopefully this will be over and by next January, and the new covered bridge would have been easier if it was the Silk Road Bridge or something. That's the one just down from, that's how they get from the two campuses. They go over the Silk Road Bridge in Bennington at the Bennington School for Girls, by the way. That's what I brought up, Silk Road. So thank you. Judge Grierson, final witness.
Yes.
Thanks. Commissioner, thank you. Please do look into that. And maybe we can talk about it the next time we're together on this issue in a couple of weeks.
Absolutely. I'm happy to.
Thank you, Senator, and thanks to the committee for inviting me. For the record, Brian Grierson, Chief Superior Judge. Yeah, my comments will be brief, but I'm certainly encouraged by the timetable that has been discussed for having this facility available. As this committee knows probably better than any other committee, with the expansion of juvenile jurisdiction over the last few years, and it will continue. The importance of having this facility can't be understated. A couple of things, Senator, that Sears, that you mentioned more than once about transportation issues, and I think this is as good a time as any for the committee and Commissioner Brown and Mr. Walter to consider as they're putting up this new facility. If there's one thing, and I'll call it a silver lining, that has come out of the pandemic, everyone knows how much that has impacted the operation of the courts as well as all the other institutions, but a significant impact on the court's operations. But what we have done and continue to try to do is expand our ability to conduct remote hearings and conduct them in a way that Marshall and his attorneys, as well as the state's attorneys, are able to communicate with each other and communicate, certainly in Marshall's case, with their clients effectively. With a new facility going up, even when this pandemic is over, we expect that the ability to conduct some hearings or even partial hearings remotely is going to continue to be important. And when you think about where Newberry is, as beautiful as that setting is over there, to get to other parts of the state obviously involves a significant transportation issue. And I can certainly remember before the pandemic hit, in talking about the youth that are served by this facility, this type of facility, as well as Woodside, there were times when we would transport somebody from Woodside to another part of the state. And let's face it, there's an element of trauma involved in those transports. Usually they were put into restraints for that transport. Sometimes I can think of at least one courthouse where in order to access the courtroom, they had to come up through a public elevator in restraints. And what I think is important to remember is if we can find a way within this new facility to accommodate video capability, I think it's important in that structure to at least have that as an option. Sometimes those hearings, they would be transporting somebody from Woodside for 2 hours for a 15-minute hearing. And I think with everything we've learned in this process during the pandemic of remote hearings, there will be a place for it. And I would just ask the commissioner as well as Mr. Walter to consider that in their plans for this new facility.
That's a great comment, Judge. One day I was touring 204 with Jim and then Commissioner Schatz, and I noticed that kids were actually visiting with their parents remotely because of COVID. The parents couldn't come down to Bennington from Newport. But then I thought back to my own experience. It was very rare that parents drove down to Bennington
Right.
from Newport to visit a kid. And how much easier it is if we are able to provide that remote access.
And I certainly think the ability and the quality of the technology that is out there now as important as it is for court proceedings. What you've just mentioned, Senator Sears, is even more important because of the geographic issues relating to living in Vermont. Sometimes it's just impossible weather-wise or economic-wise for families to have that contact. So I'm glad to answer any questions, but I know the time is short, and I just wanted to take the opportunity to make sure that issue was considered.
Have you seen an increase in Chin's kids being charged as adults?
As
a result of assaultive behavior? And
I can't say that I have, Senator, but that's because we're still pulling together our year-end data, and I don't have that at hand. So as soon as that information data is available, I'll obviously make it available to the committees. I missed John Campbell's earlier testimony, so I can't say that I have.
Yeah, but there was a recent incident, and I think that has people's minds attuned to the aggressive behavior, but I do know there's been a number of those cases.
Well, it's clear from what we're seeing, again, going back to the remote hearings, it isn't just youth that are impacted by the stress related to COVID and the pandemic. We're seeing it in hearings, a general lack of civility is more pronounced when you can see it on the screen. And so if we're seeing that in adults, it certainly doesn't surprise me that we're seeing it in youth that are under significant other pressures.
Let me ask one more question. I thought one of the most important things Marshall said to us, he probably didn't think I was listening, but I was, and we need the appropriate program for that kid. And trying to put the kid in an inappropriate program is counterproductive and can harm the kid and others within that program too, by the way. I thought that was a key comment. Do you feel right now, or do judges feel in general, that they have appropriate placements?
You know, Senator, we obviously in that context have to rely on the information that comes to us from DCF. So we can only look to the resources that are available. And I know that one of the most difficult decisions for any judge to make is when seemingly the only available treatment or program is out of state, because we know what that means, not only to the child, but to the child's family, which is their primary source of support. So that's why we're looking forward to having this program within Vermont. That's where I think you would see the judge's frustration is that it's those most, I'll say it, the most difficult children that we're working with, that the fewer options we have is what we're sensing. And that decision to send someone out of state is extremely difficult.
Senator White has a comment or question.
Well, I was just going to say that we need to remember that the states in New England are pretty small. And if we're talking about out of state, Keene or Lebanon or Concord, that's much closer to Brattleboro and Bennington than Newport and Newberry. So whichever town, I can't remember which one it was. But so I think that if you're talking about out of state in Tennessee, that's very different. But if you're talking out of state in New Hampshire or upstate New York, that, or even northern Massachusetts, that's it's all relative.
Yeah, I understand. I couldn't agree more. It's sometimes when we are sending them way beyond the New England states.
Yeah.
That's where that's where some of the programming is, the only available programming. Yep. But it still makes it a difficult decision, even if it's New Hampshire or New York.
We've reached that hour of noontime where we need to adjourn, but I want to thank everybody for being here today and for the excellent presentations, and hopefully we continue this conversation in the near future. And hopefully, Peggy, we can add disability rights to the conversation. And there is a document on our webpage from Disability Rights with suggestions for the building itself at Covered Bridge Treatment Facility.
Senator Sears?
Yeah.
Before we go, can I just make a comment? I thought that Judge Grierson was right on when he talked about making sure that there was video capability in there.
Yeah.
And I would challenge Senator Benning as chair of Senate institutions to make sure that anytime now that there's a new building that's going to be constructed or rehabbed, that there be video conferencing capabilities.
Senator Benning has been listening. And a lot of the witnesses on this screen should know they're going to be invited to an institutions committee meeting in the not too distant future.
Good.
I could just add that
Senator,
that need, and so we've had several conversations with Beckett to make sure that we have
right.
Most up-to-date technology in space for kids for video teleconferencing in the facility.
If Senator Benning, are you planning to take testimony on the concerns expressed by Vermont Disability Rights regarding the facility?
I have not seen that document yet, but I'll take
If
a
you
look.
if you take a look at it, let us know. We usually don't get involved in buildings here.
Right. Okay.
Again, thank you all very much. We've got some follow-up stuff, and Peggy will be in touch when we hold our next hearing on this issue of the. And